Here with me now to continue this conversation is Shan Wu, a former federal prosecutor, and Jeff Swartz. He's a former federal judge. He is in the state of Florida. You're in Florida. I want to start with you, Judge Swartz.
Okay.
What is your takeaway from first of all, what Paula just reported about how things seem to be going in that hearing so far?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, for the notes that we've heard from before, that I've been following the reports that have been coming out, clearly they're not going to get a July 8th date. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to hesitate to say that Trump has to be careful because he might get what he's asking for, which would open up trial dates for Chungkin after the Supreme Court comes back. So he needs to get something in late August, early September to kind of interfere with that trial being set then. However, I think that Jack has a backup plan for that, and I think that he'll get what he wants from Chungkin,
which is
probably sometime in late July, early August. I anticipate the Supreme Court will wait until the very end of the term to issue their opinion, and I think that he's got a plan to avoid whatever Judge Cannon does.
Okay, so I know there's a lot because there's so many cases out there. Shan, I'm going to bring you in. You're talking about the federal election subversion case in that particular comment. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Yeah, just wanted to guide our viewers along here.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Shan. I don't want to lose sight of the news that Paula just brought us, which is that Jack Smith's team said that they don't believe that the guidelines, it's not a policy, it certainly isn't a law in DOJ, that you shouldn't bring charges against somebody who's running for office 60 days before that election, does not apply here when it comes to the trial. It's maybe not a surprise given the fact that they brought these charges months ago, but certainly significant to hear it in a court of law.
Yes, and as you said, it's not that much of a surprise because the actual strict reading of that policy, it's not some law or something, is really not to do anything which is like opening an investigation, executing a search warrant, but it's fuzzy. We talk about it within 60 days. We're not really sure if it's 60 days, but it's the idea of you don't want to do something which could really have a big effect on the election too close to it. So, and he's technically correct because we're not talking about starting something, we're talking about simply setting the trial date. I have to say, Merrick Garland has been very hands-off with this, sometimes I think to the detriment of the integrity of the case and the speed. He might weigh in if you're really talking about, if Jack Smith says, hey, I'm ready to go 2 weeks before the election, Garland might say, you know, that just looks bad for us. So there's still some possibility that that might happen even despite what Jay Bratt's saying.
I heard you saying, Judge. I'm guessing if Merrick Garland did that, and we're obviously talking in hypotheticals here, there would be just a little bit of blowback from people in his party.
There'd be a lot of blowback. I think that if they tried to start sometime in September, knowing they'd be finished in October, I think that would be okay. Anything that would carry the case beyond Election Day, that's going to be a problem. And I think that Merrick Garland will have to step in and say the policy applies.
Let's kind of broaden this out a little bit and just to give our viewers a sense so they can look at some of what we're talking about on a calendar. First, let's just start with later, what is now this month, we're in March. March 25th, that's when a totally different trial, the New York criminal trial, starts. That has to do with that's the Alvin Bragg case. Then the week of April 22nd, that is going to be a big one. That's when the Supreme Court does hear the immunity case. And then you go to the end of June. That is when the Supreme Court typically recesses, so we'll probably hear from them before that. And then you have, July. That's the request for the start of the documents case. We're going to see how this trial and this hearing in Florida pans out today. Remember, July 15th. That's the RNC. That's the Republican National Convention, and then about a month later, that's when the former president wants to start the documents case. If you are dizzy looking at this, that's kind of the point. And I know you are both, are legal experts, but I think we have to keep in mind here on Inside Politics that all of the delay tactics that Donald Trump's lawyers are employing are very much tied in with his political strategy. Shan.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's worked very well for him, particularly the great culmination of that for him is in the Supreme Court's delay here. Even though they can say that they're moving on an expedited basis, it still has this effect of pushing everything very far off. And when you look at that calendar, I mean, you can really see what the judge was referring to, which is if Jack Smith tries to find a path for the federal cases, it's a very narrow path. Everything has to go exactly right. There can't be any winds that blow him off course. And Judge Eileen Cannon has in the past proven to be a pretty good wind.
Jeff Swartz, I just want to quickly, before I let you go, to look up a little bit northwest of where you are, to Georgia. And what is your sense of what's going to happen? Because we are waiting for a hearing to start there on the question of whether Fani Willis will remain the lead prosecutor. The DA in Georgia will remain on the case against Donald Trump there.
I think the only thing that's going to stand in the way of her staying on that case is going to be whether the judge feels that she and her lead prosecutor were deceptive and or committed perjury at the time that they testified. Other than that, I don't see any conflict of interest that would call for her to be thrown off the case. The fact that she may have had a relationship with someone she works with is not a basis to throw her and him off of the case and say they can't prosecute Donald Trump. That's not a conflict with Donald Trump and the other defendants. So I think that's what's going to happen.
Thank you both for trying to make sense of what is very, very difficult to follow, but so incredibly important.